Uh, Before proceeding, I may just share in one line my experience on my first will, which I authored for a gentleman. It was a couple. A man was 70 years, the wife was around 62 years, and the man gave everything to the wife. And while the man was moving out, the wife again came in my chamber and said, "You may charge some extra, but make sure everything is very pakka." So, you have your varied experiences while doing this will and trust planning. While we have Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti with us, I may start with the question that how is the trust created and why a will and executor is necessary. Maybe we just hear out Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti before we hear Ashwani on a similar subject.
I'd like to start at the very basic. The emotion that is prevalent in all of us is that if we have built something of value, then we would like it to be preserved and we would like it to pass on to hands which will nurture it, enhance it, make sure that the benefits of it redound not just to the family but to society at large. And it is to make sure that this particular emotion that is resident somewhere in every one of us actually gets implemented, that you need a definitive will. You need a will because you want to provide and make sure that the wish that you have will actually get fulfilled. So if a will can take care of all your wishes, then why do you need a trust? You need a trust because, as was mentioned in an earlier session and as you have heard perhaps through the day, there are very specific situations and very specific needs of particular family members, such as education, getting married, studying abroad, and many others, a very long illness. All of these need to be specifically provided for. And therefore, it is important to make sure that a certain percentage of the family's resources or wealth are put in a trust, which is managed by appropriate, well-intentioned, reliable, honest people who will make sure that the remit of that trust is actually fulfilled. Take a very peculiar case that I ran into very recently. There's this venerable gentleman nearing the age of 80. He has created an invention which he believes will change the world. He has another couple of years to go to make sure that the research is completed and the product will actually see the light of day. He's not certain that he will live through those next 2 years. And he needs to provide for this particular invention to get completed. And he was struggling with, what is it that I can do? Can I put together a set of scientists? Can I put together a group of wise and reliable people? What can I do to make sure that this invention will be completed, regardless of what happens to me in the next 2 years, and will actually be utilized to make the impact in the world that he believes it can? And so it was important to structure the continuity of the research, the emergence of the product, and the extraction of the value of that product within structures that would make sure that all of this will happen. And one of the structures that we selected was a trust sitting underneath a Section 25 company. So we created a continuity through the Section 25 company, and we created the ability to do this passing on for very specific purposes through a trust. And this is just an example of what complex situations can yield very simple outcomes and very simple results, which somebody who has the worry about what will happen post his or her not being there completely assuaged. And therefore the trust becomes very important. And that's the link between a will and a trust.
Thank you, Shailesh, for this insight. Gentlemen, when we deal with the private bankers and wealth managers, a general feedback received is that there is a syndrome called I know all. So when they approach Indian promoters with trust structures or some kind of succession planning, generally the question asked is that who is going to control the trust? Who is going to be in the driving seat? So Ashwini being here, we can deliberate and ask Ashwini that what his experience is, why there is so much desire on the part of the promoter to hold on, why there is no desire to delegate, or how his experience has been that who wants to be in the driving seat vis-a-vis a private trust when one is formed.
Sure. No, this feeling is quite real, and having dealt with families for the last 3 years and more as a private banker, patriarchs are very resistant to give up control over their businesses. It's not more about management, it's really about control. Who is controlling what percentage? I have the control to disburse the family pool of funds. That's a primary feeling. And it comes to my mind for most Indian families because of the structure of the Indian families where as Sunil Shah was saying, while we believed we had deal with all decisions in unanimity, it's really one person's decisions imposed over everybody. So here's a father who has very little appetite for listening to his children, and you want him to let go of control to his children. It's very something which he doesn't want to let go. And another thing which I would pick up from Sunil Shah is everything is a secret in an Indian family. So it's a belief that how then can I trust an outsider with my family secrets, which by its very nature estate planning or succession planning involves. That's primarily the reason, two reasons which I have seen, and there are ways to address them, been able to address them over a period of time, but it really is a time-consuming process, and it takes a whole lot of talking to the patriarch in the family to be able to win the trust. And we have seen, I think, about in the last 3-4 years, which we have been dealing with, families after a few sessions have been able to come to terms of passing on the control after one is not there, and to plan for that.
Okay. Thank you, Ashwini. Leading from here, I may also request Ashwini to throw some light. How, while interacting with the clients, how do they differentiate or explain to them the difference between family governance and business governance? Because both of them overlap each other.
Yes.
And in the long run, how you run the business and how the family members control that business, all that becomes important. So may I request Ashwini to throw some light on his experience here.
Sure. See, I've got very little experience compared to Sunil Shah, so what he said resonates, and he's covered quite a lot in his speech. But family governance is something which, to our mind, is which is like Karl Marx, whose picture was put in, that everybody needs to be provided for, everybody's interest needs to be provided for, special needs, women, people who are not working in the family business, people may be of different capability, they all need to be taken care of. Business, to our mind, is more hard-nosed. Meritocracy has to come in. And quite often families, when they are doing succession planning, fail to differentiate between 3 important aspects. One is planning for passing on the control, planning for passing on the ownership, and planning for passing on the management of the business enterprise. And true legacy, to our mind, is created only once you take care of all these 3 things. There are structures which one can form, which help in interacting, communicating between these 2. For example, what we were dealing with a family which has already written a constitution. So you're called in and say, now we want to make this legally binding structure. We want to make sure that it is maintained as it is and a legacy is preserved. So we propose to them that the family business board has been already proposed to them in the family constitution. They have accepted it. A family council has been proposed to them, which has been accepted. So the missing piece there was when we saw the constitution, how will family business board report to family council, or will family council, and what are the report to family business board, and what are the lines of different roles between the two? And when we sat down with the family after having the family constitution, we actually had to sit down for 3 days to define the roles of these two bodies which were proposed in the document. Family business board, to our mind, basically is governed, looks at the business governance, who participates. If there is a family member who is participating in the business, I think there will be very few CEOs, professional CEOs, who will go to the patriarch and say, I think your son is not doing well enough in the business. So performance analysis for the business family people, it's very hard to put through, and that's where a family business board comes in. Performance analysis of the family members involved in the business. Family council, on the other hand, is a more participative, fun-oriented, do the fun activities, family get-togethers. If we need to raise the family's living standard, what is the support we need to provide? For example, who should have a car at what level? What is the level at which a family member can apply for and be admitted to the business? All that can be governed by the family council. So more and more families are realizing that there are interactions which need to be done from business governance and family governance, and that needs to be kept separate. There has to be two separate bodies, and as Sunil was saying, two separate hats need to be worn. Very hard to differentiate when you're the same person, that I am now wearing a family council hat and I'm now wearing the business hat. But that's something which a structure needs to be built up over a period of time.
Thank you, Shri. You see, all of you may agree that there's a lot of focus these days on small and medium enterprise. All of us wish to do business with them. And while we deal with SMEs, and where the young generation particularly is joining the businesses, the old businesses, they are looking for either private equity in their businesses, or at times they are looking for listing. Now, this may require business reorganization most of the time. I have been interacting with a lot of family offices here and also the private wealth managers who at times come with these queries, how to reorganize the business. There are several companies, the holding company or the company which can be listed, or the special purpose vehicles, or the subsidiaries, and issues like this. Now, Shailesh ji present here, I may ask a question from Shailesh ji, that from business reorganization perspective, how is succession planning important?
I think it's critically important. If you ask a international fund manager today as to what is the attractiveness of investing in India, one answer that you might potentially get is that we are looking for businesses which have both scale and great governance. Now, if you want to have both of these characteristics embedded in an attractive business, one of the things that you must provide for, and it is not just at the top level that you need to provide for succession. Sunil made a brilliant point about everybody believing that they are immortal and therefore there is no need for any successor. But we believe, and I think the practice is growing today, where at every level in an organization, succession planning is being brought to the front of everybody's mind frame, because it is so important. You must be in a position to make any part of a business and every part of a business run and operate smoothly. If somebody who is today running a particular function or a particular operation should not be in a position to be there, for whatever reason, And my experience tells me that at the board level, there is now an increasing time and effort being spent to make sure that succession planning in its true sense actually starts happening. Particularly of great significance are organizations which are there largely because of the brand or the competence or the knowledge of an individual. Those are organizations which are so susceptible to poor succession planning that the entire value can be destroyed. And therefore, it becomes even more important in such organizations to create the right kind of succession. Also, it's very important to realize that ultimately it's a choice of people, and the signal about how you make those choices, which is going to drive impressions about the attractiveness of your business or your activity. And the more transparent and more explicit this is, the better it's going to become. So, what is the future of financial reporting? The future of financial reporting all over the world is what is beginning to be called now or labeled now as integrated reporting, which covers all the aspects. The business aspect, the aspect of how you deal with people and how you engage with society, what we broadly label as CSR, and how you engage with the external world, environment. Now, unless your one report can explicitly and in a very convincing way talk about how you have planned for perpetuity, how can somebody who's putting an investment today based on facts and people known today be assured that that business will continue through the entire investment cycle? That is why it has become such a crucial factor to make sure that succession planning is visible and embedded in even your communication to the shareholder. Why should an MD&A in India not discuss succession plan? That's a question that all of us need to ponder about. And when we get an answer to that question and we actually start reflecting, we'll see that very different approaches to value creation can emerge.
Thank you, Shailesh. Very useful. In his reply, Shailesh just touched upon brand. The brand, all of us know, is very, very critical and very important to each of the business houses, organizations, etc. May I request Ashwini to share his experience and throw some light how trust as a vehicle is good to sustain brands. Can the brands be held in trust? Is there any use? What has been his experiences on this front?
Sure. Thanks. And brands are becoming increasingly important in corporate arena, whether in SME or in big corporates. Very little is done to say at the SME level, very little is done to actually quantify what the brand stands for. In the patriarchal generation, when the first generation entrepreneur starts, he never plans, this is what the brand I'm going to build. The brand gets built up over a period of time due to some quality practices, due to some successes that it takes. But when the next generation comes in, they come in with a very different mindset, very different view. And at such point of time, if there's a family partition, the important question happens, who owns the brand? Which branch of the family will own the brand? Will they continue to have the same quality across all the branches? In fact, this is something which is anecdotal, and I was visiting Chennai and somebody had told me in office that there's a very famous chain of sweet shops, so please get this particular type of sweet from there. So it's Mysore Pak. Yes. So I asked my cab driver, not being from Chennai, that okay, please take me to. So he said, okay, I'll take you to this one. So He passed by two of the similar named shops, but he didn't stop there. So I asked him, why didn't you stop here? He said, no, this is not the original one. I'm taking you to the original one. There is a perceptible quality difference. Now, this taxi driver also knew that there is a difference and there is a partition in the family. The quality difference has come up while both are called by the same brand name. So what is happening over a period of time that the brand salience is getting lost over generations. So this is two partitions and three partitions and multiple partitions happen. Each has a different taste. Each has its own different style of managing. So where a trust can be used is a brand can be housed in a trust. Quality parameters with brand salience can be defined. This is what the brand stands for. The trustees are liable to protect the brand and its salience, and they license it out to each of the individual family members. So fine, you want to go and partition yourself, you want to use the same brand, please stick to the same. These are the quality parameters. In addition to that is something of a legal structure. In India, you've got two laws, which is one is your copyright law and the other is trademark law. And quite a few entrepreneurs actually do trademark and don't do copywriting, which copywriting protects you much more than. And if the copyrights are held in a trust, okay, they can be protected from any misuse of the protection. I'll give you a real life example where one of the family partitioned and they agreed on a MOU that one member of the family who was partitioning will not use the brand name in any of the products that he manufactures. He was allowed to go in the same products. While the other members, the three members who stayed together, would continue to use the same brand. So what this fellow did was, the MOU never specified that he cannot use that brand name as his corporate name. So he went and named his company with that brand name and launched a similar product which said XYZ brought to you by this corporation. Now the XYZ was in like 8 font size and brought to you by this XYZ. The corporation was in 17 font size on the packaging. So obviously everybody started associating. The other members of the family took him to court. Fortunately, the decision was faster because there was a copyright done. So we're working with the family to ensure that in case of future partitions, a similar situation doesn't arise and copyright is protected through holding into a trust. And the trustees are licensing them to each of the family or each of the operating entities.
Thank you. As a law firm, we are aware of certain structures where some corporate houses have put their brands overseas under offshore structures. And under FEMA, the payment of royalty is permitted. So it has been a means to legitimately take and invest some money abroad by adopting such structures. Thank you for this. Let me come to my last question today. All of us have been reading about the estate duty which was abolished long time back in 86 or so. And we keep on hearing that estate duty might come back and there will be some fallouts there. Since Shailesh is here, so we can take benefit of his presence to request him to throw some light on this aspect as well.
Well, Rajesh Bhai, I would strongly want that estate duty does not come back. I think that is one big attractiveness of anchoring your residency in India. But about a year ago, the wave was so strong that there is a possibility that estate duty may come back in some shape or form, that a lot of business houses started doing advanced planning and started moving their wealth and their operations into structures that would permit them to meet the challenge, if it should emerge, of estate duty being re-levied. And some of the constructs that people used were nested subsidiaries, LLPs, and other ways in which wealth could be held in a way that the challenge of estate duty could be sort of met if it does come. But I think it is not a good idea to start changing structures. It is good to think about it. It's good to create scenarios. It's good to have the plan, but it's better not to execute until you are clear as to what is actually going to be the state of the law. And I do wish, again, publicly, I would like to say that estate duty, having been abolished, should stay that way.
Thank you. So Aditya has wanted me to conclude before 1:30. We have a few minutes. Any questions? But before I take questions, I may just request that the organizers and maybe people who interact with regulators, that so far the Indian Trust Act is concerned, we have a lot of archaic laws, is one of them, 1881 or something. So the current topics we are discussing here and the subject matter on succession planning, business reorganization, etc., from a trustee perspective, it is not addressed in the Indian Trust Act. So those of you who are interacting with regulators or trying to do something there, so kindly bear in mind what kind of amendments can be brought in the Trust Act so that trust companies and the trustees could be a little more motivated to be the trustees. So it's a very, very important aspect, and there is a lot of reluctance at times to be a trustee because the Trust Act has not been amended in light of what has gone internationally on this subject. So any questions now? Yeah.
Can Shailesh throw light on the issues, taxation involved when transferring asset to trust?
You mean
During the lifetime of the settler.
so if there's whether there would be a cap gain. So if it's a property, so it depends on what is the asset that you are wanting to settle on trust. If it is a financial asset, then obviously there would be a stamp duty implication, and one would have to plan for the cap gains implication. And there are ways in which you can structure, now for example, if you are holding your assets through let us say a HUF, and the challenge is for you to hold it in your individual hand. So now you need to look at whether a partial or a complete dissolution of the HUF, which used to be something that was practiced many years ago, because there was a tax benefit to it, whether that can still be done. Now, the strange answer to that question is that the Hindu Succession Act has not been amended, but the Income Tax Act has been amended. So depending on what is the nature of your objective, you can do a full or a partial dissolution of your HUF. So everything will depend on the circumstances, and the two taxes that you need to be cognizant about are the cap gains and the stamp duty. Both these can be affected when you're doing trust planning.
Thank you.
Maybe we can take one more question if somebody has anything to ask. Thank you once again. Sorry. Yeah.
Normally, the lifespan of the trust. When a family forms a trust, what is the standard or what is the normally lifespan? Whether you'll provide for 2 generations, what will be the time when it will be dissolved?
Okay. See, a maximum lifespan of a trust is not particularly defined, as Rajesh Bhai was saying, that not particularly defined in the Indian Trust Act. But there are 2 other acts which impact the maximum lifetime of a trust. So these are Transfer of Property Act and Indian Succession Act. So the way we advise clients is that you should name a finite time period within which a trust should come to an end to bring certainty to the trust. If you do not, then by default the rule is the last born beneficiary at the time of settler's death plus 18 years is the maximum lifetime permitted as per law, if all these 3 laws were to be read together. You would like to add something?
No, I think you covered it. There's no real time limit it depends on your, but many families are thinking in terms of 50 years, 2 generations, as the time frame for which planning ought to be done, particularly if the asset is intellectual property or it's a patent or some such enduring value asset.
Make an addition. However, this transfer of property in Indian this limit does not apply to charitable trusts. So, to that extent,
True, Ashwini is right. And there is a rule against perpetuity essentially which governs this phenomena. But there are ways and means to structure it. So the law firms come very handy, you know, while you structure all this, you will consider of law firms.
yes, that's where we approach you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this patient hearing and for participation.
Thank you, dignitaries. I'm sure it was a very enriching session.